tragedy and depression to become America's greatest ever president. He had the courage to destroy slavery, but it took a civil war and the loss of 600,000 lives. His beliefs cost him his life, but without him, the United States of America would not exist today. Abraham Lincoln, America's moral hero. The man whose courage and brilliant strategy saved the nation from destruction. It was in Lincoln's nature to embrace new experiences. And when he was 19, he grabbed the opportunity to travel 1,200 miles down the Mississippi River. It was a journey that would change his outlook on life forever. He was confronted by the realities of slavery.
What he did see in New Orleans was probably the most horrific aspect of slavery, and that was the destruction of slave families at auction, the selling of slaves, and the use of slaves literally as pieces of commerce. Lincoln had always been opposed to slavery. He found slavery repugnant because slavery was a contradiction of his yearning for transformation and self-improvement. The predicament that he faced was that slavery was an enactment of the states where it was legalized. Therefore, the federal government had no authority to pass any kind of statute touching on slavery.
As his support grew, Abraham Lincoln decided to run for the presidency. After a long campaign, and with the opposition in disarray, he was successfully elected.
He ran on the non-extension of slavery. He ran on a kind of moderate Republican platform on the issue of economics. But more than anything else, I think he won because, from the standpoint of those people who were opposed to slavery, he was the only choice.
The rebel states of the South, now separate from the North, renamed themselves the Confederate States of America. Civil war was now a very real threat. United States troops still had a foothold in the South. They were occupying Fort Sumter, a small island garrison controlling Charleston Harbor in South Carolina. The newly formed Confederate Army was determined to remove them. America was now at war with itself. Abraham Lincoln had to hold the Union together, and he would need every ounce of his courage and skill to achieve it. Lincoln's presidency began disastrously. The South left the Union, and a vicious civil war commenced. Reunion of North and South had been the battle cry so far, but it was becoming clear that this was not enough. At the end of the summer of 1862, Lincoln wrote a memorandum on the will of God. Now was the time for Lincoln to make the bravest decision of his presidency. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was made public in September 1862. It announced that from the beginning of the next year, all slaves in any state still in rebellion shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. It did not apply to the border states, and it was not obeyed by the rebels, but it succeeded in doing what Lincoln had intended it to do. It reinforced the will of the Union Army to fight on. The Union Army engaged their enemy outside the small town of Gettysburg. It was to be the largest military engagement in the history of the Western Hemisphere. 170,000 soldiers clashed in a horrific battle which claimed 50,000 casualties. But after 3 days and nights, the Union Army was victorious. The Confederates fled back across the Potomac.
From that point on, the Confederacy is on the defensive. It will never fight an aggressive campaign again.
Lincoln was invited to the dedication of the cemetery and was profoundly affected by what he saw. The depth and power of his feelings were echoed in his address to the people who had gathered there.
The organizers of the occasion simply wanted a few ordinary sentences from him. And that was what he gave him, a few ordinary sentences, but sentences of such remarkable eloquence that they summed up the entire meaning of the war.
Last full measure of devotion. that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth.
What he says in the Gettysburg Address is that this is a new nation we're standing in now. The new nation that will go forth is a nation committed to human liberty and human freedom in ways that were more significant, more bold than the nation of the past. He set out the vision of America for the 21st century.
The war now over, Lincoln allowed himself a rare evening of relaxation at the theater. But a night of celebration for the president was to end in tragedy for America. John Wilkes Booth had entered the presidential box and shot Abraham Lincoln in the back of the head. The country had to be rebuilt, but without Lincoln, the United States would have ceased to exist completely.
He kept the Union together, and above all, he sets us that dramatic example that we are still a republic in which the humblest can aspire to rise to the highest position in the land. He not only embodies the American dream, in many ways, Abraham Lincoln is the American dream.
Our innocence, you